Hi everyone, thank you for joining me for Picket Fence Studios September release. I'm leading off with 2 Slimline cards and Christmas tag combos. I've used a few different mediums and they were super fun to make. Though these 2 sets incorporate a number of products from this release and the previous one, they are featuring the gorgeous seasonal Christmas flowers and a beautiful stencil in both Slimline and 6x6 format, Winter Rings. I began these cards with a session of working with alcohol inks. I played around with these inks, trying a number of different color combinations until I came up with something that I felt would be suitable for the flowers. I'm applying Ranger's alcohol inks to Canon glossy photo paper. I'm using it in combination with isopropyl alcohol. I find that I'm able to achieve the look that I want with the alcohol inks using these products. I find that the alcohol moves fairly well on this paper with the addition of the isopropyl alcohol, and they are definitely, both of these products, much more economical than paper designed for alcohol inks or the blending fluid. The value that I get by using this paper is really secondary to why I chose it. This paper is heat resistant, so I'm able to emboss on it. My most preferred method for moving the ink around is blowing into a straw. This method gives you about as much control as you could possibly have working with alcohol inks. It kind of has a mind of its own. But I have to be honest, after doing several panels, I pulled out my heat tool. I have 2 settings on my heat tool, so I chose the lower one. The amount of air that is being applied to the panel certainly lessens the control. When working with alcohol inks, I always use a turntable. It is particularly helpful with this method. Even with the isopropyl alcohol, the inks dry fairly quickly, and so you do have to be fairly quick moving your ink around, and the turntable allows you to come at it from different angles. I love working with alcohol inks. With just the one color, you can see all the different tones that you get. And now I'm going to be layering on a cranberry on this panel. Once I settled on 2 different color combinations, then I did 3 more panels for each one. The panels dry very quickly with the isopropyl alcohol, which by the way is just rubbing alcohol, but I use a higher percentage, between 80 and 90%. By the time I have finished inking my last panel, the first ones are ready to be embossed. The images that are in seasonal Christmas flowers include these gorgeous poinsettias. I will be using 2 of the larger ones on the Slimline cards. When positioning the stamp over the alcohol inks, I'm trying to catch as much variation of color as I can. For this set of flowers, I'm stamping with Distress Oxide ink Picket Fence. And I can see that I've got a good impression, so I go ahead and coat it with white embossing powder. Before applying the heat, I make sure that my heat tool has come to its maximum temperature. This paper is heat resistant. However, I wouldn't want to hold that heat in one place too long, so I'm moving my heat gun around. For these panels, with their coffee and rose-colored backgrounds, I'm going to be embossing in gold. This second set of flowers, I'm going to continue using Distress Oxide. I've switched over to fossilized amber, which is close to the gold that I'll be embossing with. This ink is slow drying, so it is a very good substitute for Versamark. Again, this poinsettia was positioned to catch as much ink color variation as I could. These embossed poinsettias are looking really pretty on the alcohol inks, but they're still looking a little bit lost with all of that background. But after they were cut with the coordinating dies, they look amazing. For my backgrounds, I'm working on Bristol Smooth cardstock. For the tags, I'm starting off with a size about 3 by 5 inches, which will be cut down later. The panel is being stenciled with the 6 by 6 format of Winter Rings. This is a really beautiful design. For one of the tags, I'm applying Paper Glaze Pink Carnation, and for the other one, Paper Glaze Luxe Coffee Beans. For my card fronts, I'll be working with the Slimline version of this stencil, where the design is a little bit larger. I'm using the same paper glazes that were used on the tags, but this time I'm not applying it to the entire panel. I'm not that up on mathematical terms, but here we go. I'm creating an isosceles triangle both at the bottom and the top of the panel and leaving a parallelogram in the middle. So how do you like that? Hope I've got that right. Thank goodness you have a visual. First panel is going to have a die cut sentiment, but this one is going to have a stamped one. So I'm laying the stamp in place to help guide where to place the paper glaze. All of the paper glazes, like the one that I used on the first panel, have a beautiful shimmer to them. The Paper Glaze Luxes have a combination of mica and glitter, taking that shimmer to the next level of sparkle. Coffee Beans Paper Glaze Luxe is truly amazing. It is so rich and beautiful. After I'm finished applying the glaze with a mixed media spatula, I smooth it out and then set it aside to dry. The drying time is actually fairly short for these glazes. Picket Fence Studios has recently introduced a new line of paper glazes called Velvet. I'm applying Winter Snowfall to a large panel that will be used for a die cut sentiment, and also to a smaller panel which I'm going to be using to layer onto my tag. The other tag stenciled with coffee beans is going to be accented with Rudolph's nose. Both Winter Snowfall and Rudolph's nose are new introductions for this release. The velvet paper glazes are quite different than the other ones. These are really gorgeous. They have a matte finish, but still there's a little bit of shimmer to them. And the texture, well, let me just say, I'm pretty sure it inspired the name Paper Glaze Velvet. And like the Paper Glazes and Paper Glaze Luxes, this new line dries quite quickly. Let It Snow was die cut from the panel that had been coated with Winter Snowfall. I decided that I wanted to texturize this big, beautiful sentiment, so I'm applying more of the Winter Snowfall and then taking the flat side of my mixed media spatula, tapping it up and down, creating this really cool texture. The small panels with Rudolph's nose and Winter Snowfall are going to be layered onto the top of the tags. The finished tags are going to measure 5 inches by 2 3/4 inches. These smaller panels will be adhered to the top 2 inches of the tag. After I adhere them with liquid adhesive, I am placing them under some weight until they dry. After I've got my tags trimmed down to size, I want to add in some diagonal cuts at the top of the tag. I want them to be the same on both sides, so I line up the top corner at the 2-inch mark on my die cutter. The bottom corner that corresponds with it will line up at the 4 3/4 inch mark. And when I do the other side of the tag, you see that I have replaced the little cutoff just so that I can get it lined up properly. And again, the top corner is at the 2-inch mark, and then the bottom corner that corresponds with it lines up at 4 3/4 inches. The tag is flipped over to the other side. I replace the other top corner with the die cut so I can get it lined up at the 2-inch mark, and then the bottom corner is lined up at 4 3/4 inches. I'm going to add some trim at the bottom of these paper glaze velvet panels. I'm applying a line of double-sided tape, a strong adhesive at the bottom of these little panels. And I think the paper glaze may have influenced what I selected for ribbon. I'm adding some beautiful velvet. Coffee colored, of course, for the card with the coffee beans glaze, and white for the other one. I'm borrowing a sentiment from another newly released stamp set called A Polar Bear Winter Celebration. The sentiment is stamped twice with Picket Fence Studios black hybrid ink and then coated with clear embossing powder. I have both sentiments ready to go with my heat tool heating up in the background. It is at its maximum temperature and I applied the heat to both the front and the back of the panel to minimize warping. A Polar Bear Winter Celebration has coordinating dies which are used to cut the sentiment out. I also use this die to cut 2 additional pieces of white cardstock so that they can be stacked. Next, I'm going to punch a hole in the top of my tags. That is when I noticed that one end of my velvet ribbon was fraying. The glue that I'm using is clear drawing, so I applied a little touch of glue to the end of my finger and then dabbed it onto the ends of both ribbons. Stacked sentiments were adhered to the paper glaze velvet panels on the tags. Something that I didn't show earlier was that I had prepared a couple of panels, one with gold sparkle and the other with sparkle, to die cut some leaves for the tags. The detail was stamped and embossed onto the die cut. 2 different styles of leaves were selected, a pair for each tag. The second largest poinsettia from this stamp set will be going on the tags. I have die cut it with the coordinating tag along with 3 pieces of cardstock so that they can be stacked. Before the flowers are attached, I first place the leaves onto the tag where I want them to be positioned. I apply a little bit of glue to the top of the leaves and then arrange the flower on top of them. And then it is adhered to the tag. I like to use embroidery floss for the ties on my tags. I take 3 or 4 lengths and then feed it through the hole and do a slip knot. And then the ends are snipped off. I chose metallic floss, copper for one card and then white and silver combination for the other. The seasonal Christmas flower stamp set also comes with a holly sprig. I'm using an alcohol marker just to color in those berries so that they stand out more. And then the holly is adhered to the band of velvet. And this was the point where I felt that I just needed to add a little something, and I had an extra poinsettia. I knew that I couldn't remove the sentiment without causing some damage. So I took the die cut for the sentiment and cut the flower. It took a couple of cuts to get it to the right size, but it fit in perfectly and you would think that it had been overlaid by the sentiment. On to the coordinating cards. I'm going to start with the Slimline that needs to have a sentiment stamped on it. Placed a sticky mat into my MISTI. I want my sentiment to have an ombre effect, and I will have to stamp a couple of times, and I don't want my panel to move. This gorgeous sentiment is from a new stamp set called To All a Good Night. It's just a little bit wide for this Slimline format, so I'm going to mask off a flourish on either side. I'm applying a dark brown ink to the bottom of the stamp. I'm then going to finish it up with a mid-brown. Although I got a fairly good impression after the first stamping, I do want those 2 browns to blend a bit more. So I put my masks back on. I'm using a little bit of Post-it note tape. This time I'm just going to use the mid-tone brown and apply it to the entire stamp. I must not have been that careful with my masking because I ended up getting a little bit of brown ink on my panel. I want to clear emboss my sentiments, so when I apply the clear embossing powder, I'm very careful to avoid that mark. And then I melt the embossing powder, applying the heat to both the front and the back of the panel. I did not want to redo this panel, so thank goodness for sand erasers. Of course, it had to be a dark ink, didn't it? I worked away at it for some time, not applying too much pressure, but I got the mark off. Now to put these cards together. For the card with the gold embossing, I'm using ivory cardstock to create my card base, which is 8.5 inches by 3.5 inches. It has been matted in dark brown cardstock. For the white embossed card, I'm using a white card base matted with silver foil cardstock. These cards will have the 2 largest poinsettias from the stamp set on them. They are going to be stacked on 3 layers of cardstock, just like the tags. After my flowers are stacked for the white embossed card, then I'm going to stack the Let It Snow sentiment. Again, I have 3 layers of cardstock that will be finished off with the textured one. I've die cut a couple of leaves from the alcohol ink backgrounds for each card. They were stamped and then embossed in either the gold or the white for some detail. For the gold embossed card, I have also die cut a few leaves out of dark brown cardstock. I have already figured out the position of the flowers and the leaves, and so I'm attaching the leaves first, and then the flower will be adhered on top. For the white embossed card, I first adhered the Let It Snow sentiment. There are some additional leaves that have been die cut from the silver foil cardstock. A dark brown alcohol marker was used to accentuate the centers of the poinsettias. I did add some sequin embellishments from the new classic Christmas sequin mix. To help them stand out, I will be accenting them. I happen to have some small applicator bottles on hand. I added golden sparkle paper glitz to one and sparkle to the other. Sparkle was added to the sequins on the tag and Christmas card with the white embossing, and golden sparkle on the other pair. I don't think I would apply the droplets directly to the card or tag for a couple of reasons. I like to have some flexibility as I'm arranging my embellishments. When something doesn't look quite right, it can be easily moved. The second reason for applying the droplets to sequins is that the sequins help it hold a nice round shape. And that completes these card sets featuring the gorgeous seasonal Christmas flowers and Winter Rings stencils. Be sure to check out the rest of Picket Fence Studios' September release. You are going to love it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I appreciate your visit.